The figure on camera 42 appeared at exactly 2:17 a.m. I remember the timestamp because I stared at it for nearly 10 seconds, trying to understand what I was seeing. The camera overlooked a remote section of protected forest nearly 60 miles from the nearest trailhead. No roads. No campsites. No public access. Just endless darkness beneath towering pines illuminated occasionally by infrared night vision. Yet there he was, standing perfectly still between the trees. A missing hiker. Not someone who looked similar. The missing hiker, Daniel Mercer, lost 8 months earlier during a search and rescue operation that involved helicopters, drones, tracking teams, and hundreds of volunteers. His disappearance had made regional news for weeks. And now he was standing directly in front of a government surveillance camera, watching it. The image remained frozen for several seconds before Daniel slowly smiled. Something about the expression felt wrong immediately. Not threatening. Not human. Like someone imitating a smile after reading about it in a book. Then he raised one hand and pointed beyond the camera. The monitoring station radio crackled beside me. A transmission arrived through a channel that wasn't connected to any active frequency. A voice whispered through layers of static. "That's not Daniel anymore." My stomach tightened. The camera feed flickered once. When the image returned, Daniel was gone. Only darkness remained beneath the trees. Then, movement appeared deeper in the forest. Dozens of figures, standing between the pines, watching the camera. 3 nights earlier. My name is Ethan Cole, and by the time I accepted the government contract to monitor deep forest surveillance systems, I had already developed an unhealthy relationship with missing people. 3 years earlier, my younger brother Nathan vanished during a solo backpacking trip in the Olympic wilderness. Search teams spent 11 days looking for him before weather conditions shut the operation down permanently. Nobody. No equipment. No evidence. Just a backpack discovered beside a creek and 100 unanswered questions that followed me everywhere afterward. Most people eventually learn how to live with uncertainty. I never did. Every news story about a missing hiker became personal. Every search and rescue report felt familiar. When the Department of Environmental Observation offered me a remote monitoring position overseeing protected forest camera networks deep inside the Cascade Range, I accepted almost immediately. The pay was excellent, but that wasn't the reason. The truth was simpler. Some irrational part of me believed that if I spent enough time watching the wilderness, eventually it might explain what happened to the people it kept. The monitoring station sat alone atop a ridge overlooking nearly 400 square miles of federally restricted forest. The facility itself resembled a cross between a fire lookout and a communications bunker. Reinforced concrete walls. Satellite dishes. Emergency generators. Rows of servers humming behind secured doors. More than 200 cameras spread throughout the wilderness transmitted live feeds back to the station 24 hours a day. Officially, the network existed to monitor wildlife migration, environmental changes, and unauthorized access inside protected zones. Unofficially, everyone knew the cameras served another purpose. People disappeared in these forests far more often than statistics should allow. Hikers. Hunters, researchers, sometimes entire groups. Most were eventually found. Some weren't. The government never acknowledged any connection between the surveillance program and the disappearances, but nobody working there seemed eager to discuss why the network expanded every year. The station supervisor, a former ranger named Martin Shaw, conducted my orientation during a rainstorm that lasted nearly the entire afternoon. Most procedures sounded straightforward. Monitor camera feeds. Report system failures. Document unusual activity. Maintain observation logs. Then Martin handed me a binder labeled Field Anomaly Response Guidelines. The title alone made me laugh. At first, the contents became progressively stranger with every page. If a missing person appears on any camera feed, do not attempt direct communication. If multiple cameras display the same individual simultaneously, disconnect the affected channels immediately. Never zoom in on subjects standing motionless for more than 3 minutes. If camera 42 activates without motion detection, leave the feed unchanged. Most unusual of all was the final instruction printed in bold across an entire page. If a subject appears to recognize the camera, notify supervisory personnel immediately and do not acknowledge the subject verbally. Naturally, I assumed the rules existed because isolated workers develop unusual habits over time. Surveillance operators spend thousands of hours staring at empty landscapes. Eventually, they start noticing patterns where none exist. Martin didn't seem interested in discussing the guidelines either. Every time I asked about specific incidents, he redirected the conversation toward technical systems or maintenance schedules. Only once did he hesitate. We were standing inside the control room overlooking rows of live camera feeds when I pointed toward camera 42 on one of the monitors. The location appeared ordinary enough. Dense forest. Rocky terrain. No established trails. Yet the feed carried a small warning icon absent from every other camera in the network. Martin stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. "That area's responsible for most of the rules," he said quietly. "Just remember something. The cameras aren't there to watch what's in the forest." Then he walked away before I could ask what that meant. My first night alone at the station began quietly. Rain drifted through the trees outside while hundreds of camera feeds displayed endless darkness beneath infrared illumination. Forests at night possess a strange quality when viewed through surveillance systems. Familiar landscapes become alien. Trees resemble figures standing in groups. Shadows appear deeper than they should. Small movements attract disproportionate attention. Around midnight, I started reviewing archived incident reports left behind by previous operators. Most documented ordinary events. Wildlife sightings. Equipment failures. Weather damage. Then I found a report dated 9 months earlier. The entry described a missing hiker appearing briefly on camera 42 nearly 6 months after search efforts ended. The attached images showed a man standing between the trees staring directly into the lens. The operator's notes ended abruptly after a single handwritten sentence added beneath the official report. "He smiled when I recognized him." I remember reading the line twice. Then glancing toward camera 42. For just a second, I thought I saw movement between the trees. For the first few nights, the guidelines felt less like warnings and more like the accumulated superstitions of people who had spent too long watching empty forests. Surveillance work has a peculiar effect on the mind. Hours pass with absolutely nothing happening. Then suddenly a deer crosses a clearing or a tree falls during a storm, and your brain treats the event as far more significant than it really is. I assumed the previous operators had experienced the same thing. After all, most camera feeds showed nothing except darkness, weather, and wildlife. My shifts settled into a predictable routine. Monitor the network. Log equipment issues. Review archived footage. Drink too much coffee. Outside the station, the wilderness stretched endlessly beneath rain clouds and mountain fog. Inside, hundreds of infrared feeds transformed the forest into a monochrome world of silver trees and black shadows. The isolation felt strangely comforting at first. Unlike cities, Forests don't pretend to care whether you're paying attention to them. The cameras themselves became familiar surprisingly quickly. Each covered a specific section of terrain and developed its own personality over time. Some overlooked ridgelines where elk herds migrated seasonally. Others monitored river valleys or abandoned logging roads reclaimed by wilderness. Camera 42 remained different. Not because anything unusual appeared there initially. Quite the opposite. The feed seemed almost unnaturally quiet. Wildlife rarely crossed its field of view. Wind moved through surrounding trees, yet the central clearing remained strangely still. More than once, I checked the system diagnostics, assuming the camera had frozen. Every test came back normal. One archived maintenance report described the phenomenon as a dead zone. Another called it a recognition site. Neither explanation clarified anything. Whenever I asked Martin about the area, he simply reminded me not to adjust the camera angle under any circumstances. The first genuinely strange incident occurred on my fourth night. Around 1:30 a.m., several cameras located miles apart triggered simultaneous motion alerts. That wasn't unusual by itself. Animals often moved through multiple sectors. What caught my attention was the subject description generated by the tracking software. Human. Every alert identified a single human figure. Camera 18. Camera 31. Camera 55. Camera 63. The problem was distance. The locations sat nearly 20 miles apart. No person could physically move between them fast enough to trigger the sequence. Curious, I reviewed the footage. Each camera showed the same thing. A lone figure standing just beyond the tree line. Motionless. Facing the camera directly. The resolution wasn't clear enough to identify details. Just a silhouette. Yet every appearance lasted exactly 7 seconds before the figure stepped behind a tree and vanished. The timestamps placed the events less than 30 seconds apart. When I mentioned the anomaly in my shift report, Martin responded with a single message. Do not compare the appearances. Nothing else. No explanation. No follow-up. The instruction bothered me far more than the footage itself. 2 nights later, the station radio began receiving unexplained transmissions. The network wasn't connected to public channels. Emergency communications operated through separate systems entirely. Yet shortly after 2 a.m., bursts of static started appearing through the speakers. At first, the interference sounded random. Then words emerged beneath the noise. Not complete conversations. Fragments. Names. Coordinates. Distances. Sometimes the voices sounded like search and rescue personnel conducting operations. Other times they resembled distressed hikers attempting radio contact. Every transmission ended abruptly before context became clear. The strangest message arrived just before dawn. A male voice spoke calmly through several layers of distortion. We found him near Sector 42, he said. He's watching the cameras again. Then the signal disappeared. No record of the transmission appeared in communication logs afterward. It was as though the station itself hadn't heard it. The incident that finally unsettled me happened during a routine archive review. Government policy required operators to examine older missing person cases periodically in case new footage revealed overlooked information. Around midnight, I opened a file involving a college student named Aaron Blake who disappeared 2 years earlier while hiking alone through restricted forest sectors. The case contained hundreds of search photographs and surveillance images. Most were unremarkable. Then I reached the final attachment. A still frame captured from camera 42 6 months after Aaron vanished. He stood in the clearing staring directly into the lens. What disturbed me wasn't his appearance. It was the operator's notes beneath the image. The previous observer had documented Aaron raising one hand toward the camera before disappearing from view. Then, beneath the official report, someone added a handwritten sentence nearly identical to the one I'd seen earlier. He knew which camera I was watching. I remember feeling a sudden urge to look toward camera 42. Not because I expected to see anything. Because for the first time since arriving at the station, I had the distinct sensation that something might already be looking back. The rule I ended up breaking wasn't the obvious one. I didn't respond to a radio transmission. I didn't alter camera 42's position. I didn't attempt contact with one of the figures appearing throughout the network. Instead, I violated a rule that seemed almost absurdly specific. Do not compare the appearances. At the time, the instruction felt less like a safety precaution and more like bureaucratic nonsense left behind by an overly cautious supervisor. The surveillance system stored thousands of hours of footage. Comparing images was part of the job. That's how patterns are identified. That's how missing person investigations work. So when another series of simultaneous sightings occurred across multiple sectors during my 7th night at the station, I decided to ignore Martin's warning and examine the footage side by side. The figures had appeared again on cameras 18, 31, 55, and 63 within less than a minute. Same posture, same height, same behavior. Standing motionless at the edge of the frame before disappearing behind trees. I exported the clips into comparison software and synchronized the timestamps. At first, the results seemed harmless. The figures looked nearly identical. Not impossible. Just unusual. Similar clothing. Similar build. Similar posture. Forest surveillance footage often obscures details. Human brains naturally exaggerate similarities when viewing low-resolution images. For several minutes, I studied the recordings while trying to identify differences. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten unexpectedly. The figures weren't merely similar. They were identical. Same stance. Same arm position. Same tilt of the head. Every movement occurred at precisely the same moment across all 4 recordings, despite the cameras being separated by miles of terrain. It looked less like 4 individuals behaving similarly and more like the same video copied onto different feeds. Yet the backgrounds remained authentic. Trees swayed differently. Weather conditions varied slightly. Wildlife moved independently. Only the person remained perfectly synchronized. I replayed the footage repeatedly before finally convincing myself it had to be some kind of software error. Motion tracking systems malfunction. Video archives corrupt themselves. There were explanations. Rational explanations. Then I zoomed in. That was my second mistake. The image quality degraded immediately, but enough detail remained visible to reveal the subject's face. Not clearly. Just fragments. Pale skin. Dark hair. Hollow eyes. Yet even those incomplete details were enough for recognition. The figure wasn't a random person. It matched Aaron Blake, the missing college student from the archived case file. Same facial structure. Same jacket. The same appearance was recorded 2 years earlier on camera 42. I sat frozen in front of the monitor for several seconds while trying to process what I was seeing. Aaron had vanished years ago. Search teams never found him. Yet somehow identical images of him continued appearing throughout the forest surveillance network. The realization should have alarmed me. Instead, I felt an unexpected surge of excitement. Finally, something concrete. Something measurable. Evidence instead of rumors. Evidence instead of handwritten warnings and unexplained radio messages. Nothing terrible happened immediately afterward. In fact, the following 24 hours felt almost disappointingly normal. No strange transmissions arrived through the radio. No figures appeared on camera 42. The comparison software revealed nothing else unusual. By the next evening, I had nearly convinced myself the entire incident resulted from archived footage accidentally inserted into live feeds by a software fault. The explanation wasn't perfect, but it was sufficient. Enough to restore a sense of control. Enough to make the station feel ordinary again. I even included a detailed report for Martin documenting my findings. He never responded. Looking back, that silence should have worried me more than any anomaly. Instead, I interpreted it as confirmation that the issue wasn't serious. Rules get broken all the time. Nothing had happened. The forest remained the forest. The cameras remained cameras. Whatever mystery surrounded camera 42 clearly wasn't interested in me. Then, around 2:11 a.m., camera 42 activated. No motion alert triggered. No system notification appeared. The feed simply changed. One moment, the clearing sat empty beneath infrared illumination. Next, someone stood there. Aaron Blake. Closer than before. Much closer. Not at the edge of the trees. In the center of the clearing. Facing the camera directly. For several seconds, he remained completely motionless. Then something happened that no archived report had ever described. Slowly, deliberately, Aaron raised one hand toward the lens. Not waving. Not signaling. Pointing. At first, I assumed he was pointing toward the camera itself. Then I realized the angle was wrong. His finger wasn't directed at the lens. It was directed at me. At the observation window behind the monitor. At the control room. At the exact place where I was standing. Then he smiled. The same wrong smile described in the archived reports. And for the briefest moment before the feed cut to static, I could have sworn he mouthed two words. I remember. After Aaron smiled at the camera, I spent nearly an hour convincing myself I hadn't actually seen him point at me. Memory is unreliable under stress. Surveillance operators know that better than anyone. Spend enough time staring at low-resolution footage in the middle of the night, and your brain begins filling gaps automatically. Faces appear where shadows exist. Intentions emerge from meaningless movements. I repeated those facts to myself constantly during the following day. Yet every explanation collapsed whenever I remembered the final detail. The words. Not hearing them. Seeing them. I remember. The phrase replayed endlessly in my head while rain hammered against the observation station windows outside. By sunset, I had almost managed to compartmentalize the experience. Then I opened the activity logs. Camera 42's activation no longer existed. According to the system archives, the feed remained inactive throughout the entire night. No motion detection. No recording. No stored footage. It was as though the event had never happened. Except I remembered it. And buried inside my workstation cache, I discovered a single corrupted screenshot captured automatically at 2:11 a.m. Aaron's face remained visible. So did the smile. The radio transmissions changed that night. Before, the voices always sounded distant. Fragmented. like recordings bleeding through damaged frequencies. Now they have arrived clearly. Entire conversations lasting several minutes at a time. Search coordinators discussing missing hikers. Rangers reporting sightings. Emergency personnel are exchanging coordinates. At first, everything sounded normal. Then I noticed a pattern. The conversations referenced people who disappeared years earlier. Cases archived and closed. Search operations long abandoned. Yet the participants spoke as though the events were occurring in real time. Around 1:40 a.m., I listened to a team leader coordinate a search for Aaron Blake despite the fact that Aaron vanished more than 2 years ago. 30 minutes later, another transmission discussed Daniel Mercer, the missing hiker from the cold open incident that hadn't technically happened yet. The timestamps didn't make sense. The dates didn't match. Every conversation felt displaced somehow. Like the forest was replaying pieces of unresolved events long after they should have ended. Then the camera network started behaving strangely. Not failing. Adapting. Motion alerts began triggering before subjects entered the frame. Wildlife appeared in recordings several seconds before becoming visible. One camera documented a fallen tree hours before the storm that eventually knocked it down. At first, the anomalies seemed minor. Technical glitches. Synchronization errors. Then I noticed something impossible. Certain cameras had stopped showing the forest entirely. The feeds still functioned. Trees remained visible. Weather conditions remained accurate. But subtle details changed. Trails appeared where none existed previously. Small clearings emerged between clusters of trees. Structures surfaced briefly through the darkness before vanishing again. Cabins. Campsites. Observation towers. Places absent from every official survey. Every anomaly occurred near sectors associated with missing person cases. Most disturbing of all, the changes persisted between recordings. The network wasn't generating random errors. It was gradually constructing something. 3 nights after breaking the rule, Martin finally contacted me. Not through email. Not through the station phone. Through Camera 42. I was reviewing overnight footage when the fees suddenly activated. The clearing remained empty. Then Martin walked into frame from the left side of the image. My stomach tightened immediately because that was impossible. He was hundreds of miles away attending a regional operations conference. I had spoken with him less than 12 hours earlier. Yet there he was. Same clothing. Same posture. Same expression. He stopped in the center of the clearing and stared directly into the camera. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then Martin raised one hand slowly. The same gesture Aaron used. Pointing toward the observation station. Pointing toward me. After that, he spoke. The camera had no audio system. Yet I heard him clearly. "Ethan," he said. My blood ran cold. "Stop comparing them." The feed immediately cut to static. When I called Martin afterward, he answered on the second ring. According to him, he hadn't left the conference hotel all day. He laughed nervously when I described the incident. Then he became very quiet. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he sighed heavily and asked a question that made my stomach drop. "How many of them recognize you now?" Before I could answer, the connection died. The final escalation arrived just before dawn. Camera 42 activated again without warning. The clearing was full. Not one person. Not 2. Dozens. Missing hikers. Search and rescue personnel. Hunters. Campers. Every face matched archived case files stored inside the station database. Some disappeared months ago. Others decades earlier. They stood together beneath the trees, staring toward the camera in complete silence. No movement. No emotion. Just observation. Then, one by one, they began turning their heads toward something deeper inside the forest behind them. Something is approaching through the darkness. The crowd parted slowly. A path opened between the trees. And walking toward the camera was someone wearing my brother Nathan's jacket. Seeing Nathan's jacket in the clearing broke something inside me. Not because I believed it was actually my brother. By then, the forest had already demonstrated its ability to manipulate appearances, records, and perceptions. Rationally, I understood that. Emotionally, it didn't matter. Grief doesn't care about logic. The moment the figure emerged from the trees wearing the faded green jacket, Nathan disappeared 3 years earlier. Every professional instinct I possessed vanished beneath a tidal wave of hope and dread. I spent nearly 20 minutes staring at the frozen frame after camera 42 disconnected. Then I did something I should have done weeks earlier. I stopped reviewing current surveillance data and started digging into the station's oldest archives. Not the digital records accessible through the network. The physical archives hidden beneath the facility. Every government installation accumulates forgotten storage rooms eventually. Places where obsolete reports, backup recordings, and paperwork go to disappear. According to the building schematics, the lower level contained nothing except generator maintenance equipment. The schematics were lying. The archive occupied an entire sealed section beneath the station. Dust-covered filing cabinets stretched through concrete rooms illuminated by aging emergency lights. Most of the records predated the surveillance network entirely. Search and rescue reports. Ranger journals. Missing person investigations dating back nearly 70 years. At first, the files appeared unrelated. Different decades. Different circumstances. Different victims. Then the pattern emerged. Every case is connected to the same area surrounding Camera 42. Hikers vanished there. Rangers disappeared there. Researchers abandoned projects there. Some were eventually recovered miles away with fragmented memories. Others were never found at all. More disturbing, many reports contained descriptions nearly identical to my own experiences. Witnesses observing missing individuals months after disappearances. Radio communications originating from closed cases. People claiming the forest remembered them after they had investigated too deeply. One report from 1984 described a search coordinator encountering his missing son on a trail camera 7 years after the boy vanished. The final note attached to the file consisted of a single sentence. The forest doesn't return people. It returns recognition. The oldest records proved even stranger. Long before surveillance cameras existed, forest rangers documented something they called echo events. The reports described sightings of missing persons occurring near locations associated with unresolved disappearances. At first, investigators assumed witnesses were experiencing grief-induced hallucinations. Then, multiple observers started reporting the same individuals simultaneously. Entire search teams witnessed missing hikers standing between trees miles from where they should have been. Yet attempts to approach always failed. The figures retreated deeper into the wilderness before vanishing completely. Eventually, the phenomenon became classified. Not because anyone understood it. Because acknowledging it publicly complicated missing person investigations beyond reason. One journal written by a ranger named William Harker in 1968 contained an observation that haunted me afterward. The appearances become more accurate the longer someone searches for them, he wrote. At first, they resemble memories. Late, they resemble people. Eventually, the difference becomes impossible to measure. Then I found the recordings. Not surveillance footage. Interviews. Dozens of them. Operators. Rangers. Search coordinators. Every individual assigned to monitor the anomaly over the decades eventually recorded personal statements before leaving the program. Most sounded exhausted. Some sounded frightened. A few sounded broken. Yet all described the same realization. The figures appearing throughout the forest weren't imitating missing people randomly. They were learning them. Studying them. Every photograph. Every search effort. Every memory shared by friends and family provided additional information. The more attention a disappearance received, the more detailed the appearance became afterward. One former supervisor explained it best during a recording made shortly before his retirement. "We thought the cameras were documenting the phenomenon," he said. "The truth is worse. The cameras are feeding it. Every image helps it understand what it's trying to become." The final discovery waited inside a locked cabinet labeled Observer Attrition Reports. The files contained information about former surveillance operators. Every person assigned to monitor Camera 42. At first, the reports looked routine. Psychological evaluations. Performance reviews. Transfer requests. Then I noticed something impossible. Several operators officially resigned years after they disappeared. Others continued filing observation logs long after their deaths. One case involved an observer named Rachel Dunn who vanished during a winter storm in 2009. According to personnel records, she remained employed for another 6 years. Her reports continued arriving weekly despite nobody knowing where she was. The final log submitted under her credentials contained only one paragraph. "They aren't copying missing people. They're copying the observers." A cold weight settled in my stomach as I opened the last file in the cabinet. The folder was newer than everything else. Created only 3 days earlier. The name printed across the cover was mine. Ethan Cole. Observer transition status. Inside, a photograph waited. Not from a staff ID. Not from a personnel file. A still frame captured by Camera 42. I was standing among the missing hikers in the clearing, facing the trees, watching something approach from deeper within the forest. After finding my own file inside the Observer Transition Archive, I stopped thinking about the phenomenon as something happening in the forest and started understanding it as something happening to me. That distinction changed everything. Up until then, I had assumed the missing hikers were the primary victims. The surveillance operators were merely witnesses. The records beneath the station proved otherwise. Every observer eventually became part of the system they monitored. Not immediately. Gradually. The process always followed the same pattern. Recognition. Obsession. Identification. Transition. The terminology appeared repeatedly throughout decades of reports. Operators began noticing anomalies. Then they started seeing familiar faces. Eventually, the forest responded with people they personally needed to find. Missing relatives. Lost friends. Unresolved disappearances. The phenomenon adapted itself to whatever emotional gap remained open inside the observer. By the time they realized the pattern, the process was already well underway. Looking back, Nathan's appearance wasn't random. It was targeted. I created my own rules the next morning. Never review archived footage involving Nathan. Never compare current sightings to missing person records. Never remain alone in the observation room after 2 a.m. Never look directly into the eyes of anyone appearing on camera 42. Most importantly, never assume a figure is trying to deceive you. That final rule took the longest to understand. Every previous observer described the appearances as mimics, copies, or imitations. Yet the deeper I dug into the archives, the less accurate those descriptions felt. The figures weren't pretending to be missing people. They were becoming them. Or at least becoming whatever remained inside the memories surrounding them. The distinction mattered because it suggested intent wasn't the point. The phenomenon wasn't hunting observers. It was incorporating them. Like a biological process operating on recognition instead of flesh. Once I understood that, fear gave way to something worse. Anticipation. I started noticing evidence of the transition everywhere. The station systems began adapting first. Personnel databases contained information I never entered. Observation reports appeared under my credentials, describing events that hadn't occurred yet. Several files referenced conversations I would eventually have with Martin days before they happened. At first, I assumed the records were being altered externally. Then I discovered something impossible. Many of the reports were written in my own style. Same phrasing, same shorthand, same habits developed over years of technical documentation. The files didn't merely contain my name. They contained my voice. One report described a sighting scheduled to occur 2 nights later. Another documented maintenance issue I wouldn't discover until the following afternoon. The details proved accurate every time. The archive wasn't predicting events. It was recording them before I experienced them. Just like the radio transmissions. Just like the sightings. Just like the missing hikers themselves. The cameras changed after that. Not all of them. Only the ones nearest camera 42. The figures appearing throughout the network no longer stood motionless. They moved. Walked between trees. Gathered in clearings. Sometimes they appeared to be searching for something. Other times, they simply watched the cameras from impossible distances. Yet one detail remained consistent. Every sighting involved people documented inside the station archives. Missing hikers. Lost researchers. Former operators. Then, one night around 2:23 a.m., I noticed a new face among them. A man standing near the edge of a riverbank on camera 31. The image quality was poor. The lighting worsens. Yet recognition arrived instantly. It was me. Not a resemblance. Not a mistake. Me. Same jacket. Same beard. Same scar above my left eyebrow. The figure remained visible for 9 seconds before stepping behind a tree and disappearing. The sighting should have terrified me. Instead, I felt an unsettling sense of familiarity. Because somewhere deep down, I already knew exactly where the camera was located. I knew what the river sounded like. I knew how cold the air felt there. The knowledge arrived without explanation. Like remembering a place I had never visited. That was the moment I understood what the transition reports meant. The phenomenon wasn't copying observers after they disappeared. It was teaching them the route first. The final rule emerged 3 nights later. At 2:17 a.m., camera 42 activated automatically. The clearing wasn't empty. Hundreds of people stood among the trees. Missing hikers. Search teams. Former operators. Everyone is documented throughout the archives. All facing the same direction. Watching something deeper in the forest. Then, one by one, they began turning toward the camera. Toward me. Not hostile. Not threatening. Expectant. As though waiting for someone to arrive. A new observation report appeared on my monitor at the same moment. No timestamp. No author. Just a single sentence. Subject has started recognizing the path. After the report appeared, I stopped pretending I was still an observer. Observers watch. Observers document. Observers remain separate from what they're studying. Whatever line existed between me and the phenomenon had already dissolved. The evidence surrounded me everywhere. Future reports written in my voice. Sightings of myself moving through sectors I had never physically entered. Personnel records describing events before they occurred. Most disturbing of all, the station itself seemed to understand my role had changed. The surveillance software stopped generating anomaly alerts. Camera 42 no longer triggered warnings when active. Entire security protocols quietly disabled themselves around certain footage. It was as though the network no longer considered me someone monitoring the phenomenon. It considered me part of it. That realization settled over me during a stormy night while rain hammered against the observation windows and hundreds of infrared feeds illuminated the control room with pale silver light. For the first time since arriving, I felt the station watching me. The radio transmissions became personal after that. Not voices from search operations. Not fragments of old emergencies. Conversations. Direct conversations. Nathan spoke first. The voice emerged through the communication system at 2:17 a.m. exactly as camera 42 activated. For several seconds, I simply listened. Not because I believed it was really him. Because it sounded so perfectly real. Every inflection. Every habit. Every small detail memory refuses to let die. He didn't ask for help. He didn't beg me to find him. Instead, he spoke calmly as though continuing a conversation interrupted only moments earlier. "You're making the same mistake they all made," he said. Static crackled softly behind his voice. "You keep thinking the forest wants something from you." I gripped the edge of the console so tightly that my hands hurt. "Then what does it want?" I asked before remembering the rules. Several seconds passed. Then Nathan laughed quietly. "Nothing. It already has us." The cameras responded immediately. Every monitor inside the station changed simultaneously. Not to static. To live feeds. Hundreds of them. Every camera displays the same location. The clearing surrounding camera 42. The impossible geometry of the image made my stomach turn instantly. Different cameras positioned miles apart should not have been capable of viewing the same space. Yet somehow they all did. The clearing appeared from hundreds of angles simultaneously. Trees surrounded the area in impossible configurations. Trails entered and exited the forest without connecting logically. Most disturbing were the people. Thousands of them stood beneath the trees. Missing hikers. Search teams. Rangers. Former operators. Every face documented throughout 70 years of archives. Some looked frightened. Others peaceful. A few appeared almost relieved. None acknowledged one another. All stared toward the center of the clearing, where something enormous moved between the trees beyond camera range. Then Martin appeared on the station monitors. Not in the forest. Inside the observation room. Every camera feed showed him standing directly behind my chair. I spun around immediately. Nobody was there. When I looked back toward the screens, Martin remained visible. Exhausted. Older than I remembered. The image felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Not fake. Not supernatural. More like a memory slowly replacing reality. Then he spoke through every monitor simultaneously. "We thought they were mimics," he said quietly. That was the first misunderstanding. Rain rattled against the station windows outside. The cameras flickered briefly. Martin's expression darkened. "The hikers aren't being copied, Ethan." He pointed toward the clearing. "They're being remembered." At exactly 2:53 a.m., camera 42 zoomed automatically. No operator input. No software command. The image focused on the center of the clearing where the crowd had gathered. And finally, I saw what they were watching. A trail. Nothing more. Just a narrow path winding deeper into the forest beyond the camera range. Yet the sight triggered immediate recognition. Not familiarity. Certainty. I knew that trail. I knew where it led. Not because I had walked it before. Because some part of me already existed farther down it. The realization hit like a physical impact. Every sighting. Every future report. Every observer transition file suddenly aligned beneath a single horrifying truth. The phenomenon wasn't creating copies of missing people. It wasn't replacing them. The forest functioned like a memory system. Every disappearance, every search, every act of recognition left an imprint behind. Over time, those imprints grew detailed enough to continue existing independently. The missing hikers weren't trapped. They had become part of whatever remembered them. A final report appeared across my monitor. No author. No timestamp. No classification. Just one sentence. Observer arrival imminent. Then every figure in the clearing turned toward the camera simultaneously, including Nathan. And for the first time since he disappeared 3 years earlier, he looked directly at me and smiled. Not the wrong smile. Not the mimic's smile. His smile. Then he stepped aside, making room on the trail for someone approaching from deeper in the forest. Someone who looked exactly like me. For several seconds, I couldn't move. The figure standing at the edge of the trail wasn't an imitation. It wasn't one of the incomplete reconstructions that had haunted the camera network for weeks. This version of me looked real in a way the others never had. Every detail matched perfectly. The posture, the exhaustion beneath the eyes, the faint scar above my eyebrow, even the way he held his shoulders slightly forward after years of staring at computer screens. Behind him, the trail disappeared into darkness beyond the reach of every camera. Around him stood thousands of missing people gathered beneath the trees. None appeared frightened anymore. None appeared trapped. They simply watched, waiting. The station monitors illuminated the control room with pale light while rain hammered against the windows outside. Somewhere deep inside the facility, alarms began sounding softly. Not emergency alarms. Arrival notifications. Then my double spoke. Not through the cameras. Through the station intercom. "You're still looking at this backwards, Ethan." The voice echoed through empty hallways beyond the observation room. My stomach tightened. Because the intercom system wasn't connected to the surveillance network. Slowly, I stood and opened the observation room door. The hallway outside was empty. Yet footsteps echoed somewhere deeper inside the station. My footsteps, matching my pace exactly. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. For the first time, I realized every former observer made the same mistake. They treated the forest as the source of the phenomenon. The forest wasn't creating the imprints. The observers were. Every search operation, every photograph, every memory, every desperate refusal to let go. The surveillance system amplified those acts of recognition until they became something permanent. The cameras weren't feeding a creature hidden in the wilderness. They were preserving unresolved people. The deeper I thought about it, the more horrifying the truth became. The missing hikers hadn't been consumed. They had been archived, preserved inside a system built accidentally from decades of observation. A living record sustained by attention itself. I returned to the control room and began doing something no report had ever described. I started shutting the cameras down. One by one. Sector 18. Offline. Sector 31. Offline. Sector 55. Offline. The monitors went dark across the room while rain battered the station windows. Almost immediately, resistance began. Systems rebooted automatically. Feeds restored themselves. Archived footage reopened on disconnected screens. Yet I kept going. Not because I believed I could destroy the network. Because I finally understood what needed to change. The phenomenon survived through observation. Through endless recording. Through people refusing to allow disappearances to end. Every camera represented another act of recognition. Another anchor holding the archive together. For 70 years, the system had been expanding because nobody ever stopped looking. Then Nathan appeared again. Not on camera 42. On a disconnected monitor. The screen had no power. No signal. Yet his image remained visible. He looked tired. Older. Human. "Ethan," he said quietly. I stared at the screen. For the first time, I didn't ask questions. I didn't search for explanations. I didn't try to determine whether he was real. Because that was the trap. Recognition. Validation. Participation. Instead, I simply nodded. And closed the monitor. The image disappeared instantly. Outside, the storm intensified. The monitors went dark across the room while rain battered the station windows. Almost immediately, resistance began. Systems rebooted automatically. Feeds restored themselves. Archived footage reopened on disconnected screens. Yet I kept going. Not because I believed I could destroy the network. Because I finally understood what needed to change. The phenomenon survived through observation. Through endless recording. Through people refusing to allow disappearances to end. Every camera represented another act of recognition. Another anchor holding the archive together. For 70 years, the system had been expanding because nobody ever stopped looking. Then Nathan appeared again. Not on camera 42. On a disconnected monitor. The screen had no power. No signal. Yet his image remained visible. He looked tired. Older. Human. "Ethan," he said quietly. I stared at the screen. For the first time, I didn't ask questions. I didn't search for explanations. I didn't try to determine whether he was real. Because that was the trap. Recognition. Validation. Participation. Instead, I simply nodded. And closed the monitor. The image disappeared instantly. Outside, the storm intensified. Every remaining camera feed began flickering simultaneously. Missing hikers vanished from clearings. Search teams dissolved between trees. Trails disappeared. Structures hidden within the forest faded from view. The archive was collapsing. Not violently. Quietly. Like a memory finally being allowed to end. Then the final monitor remained active. Camera 42. The clearing stood empty. The crowd was gone. The trail was gone. Only the forest remained. And standing beside the camera was the other version of me. The one from the trail. He smiled sadly. Then reached forward. And turned the camera off from the other side. Every screen in the station went black. For several seconds, total darkness filled the control room. Then, somewhere beyond the walls, I heard something I hadn't heard once since arriving at the facility. The forest. Just the forest. Wind moving through trees. Rain falling on leaves. Nothing else. And for the first time in 3 years, I could no longer remember Nathan's face perfectly. I resigned from the surveillance program 2 weeks later. Officially, the reason listed in my departure paperwork was psychological fatigue resulting from prolonged isolation. Nobody argued. Nobody asked questions. In fact, the administrators processing my exit seemed relieved. The camera network surrounding Sector 42 had suffered catastrophic data loss during the same storm that disabled most of the station systems. Years of archived footage vanished. Observation logs disappeared. Hundreds of anomaly reports simply ceased to exist. Investigators blamed hardware failures and database corruption. Technicians rebuilt the network from backups. New cameras replaced old ones. New operators arrived. Life moved forward exactly as bureaucracies always do. Efficiently. Quietly. Yet throughout the entire process, nobody mentioned the observer transition files. Nobody referenced the missing archives beneath the station. According to official records, those materials had never existed. It was as though the surveillance system itself had deliberately forgotten. For a while, I convinced myself the collapse worked. The sightings stopped. The radio transmissions vanished. No future reports appeared under my credentials. Most importantly, I stopped dreaming about the forest. Before leaving the station, nearly every night ended the same way. I would find myself walking a trail through endless trees while distant figures watched from between the trunks. After the cameras went dark, those dreams disappeared completely. I found work farther south, monitoring weather systems instead of wilderness. Cities replaced forests. Streetlights replaced infrared feeds. Slowly, normal life returned. Not perfect. Never perfect. But manageable. For the first time since Nathan disappeared, I stopped searching for him everywhere. I stopped reading missing person reports. I stopped chasing mysteries hidden inside tragedies. Eventually, I even convinced myself I had accepted what happened. Then the photographs arrived. No return address. No postage markings. Just a plain envelope waiting inside my mailbox one rainy evening, nearly 11 months after leaving the station. Inside were 7 photographs. Every image depicted the same location. Camera 42's clearing. Daylight. No figures. No anomalies. Just trees. At first, the pictures seemed harmless. Then I noticed the dates. Each photograph had been taken decades apart. 1973. 1974. 1975, 1976, 1977, 1978, and the final image. Tomorrow. The clearing appeared identical in every photograph. Nothing changed. Nothing aged. Nothing moved. Except for one detail. Someone stood among the trees in the background of each picture. Too distant to identify clearly. Too small to recognize, yet unmistakably present, watching the camera, watching whoever eventually received the photograph. I barely sleep now. Most nights, I wake around 2:17 a.m., convinced I hear radio static somewhere inside my apartment despite owning no radio equipment. Sometimes, Security cameras mounted outside office buildings seem familiar in ways I can't explain. Other times, I catch myself recognizing faces in crowds before remembering where I've supposedly seen them. But the worst moments happen when I encounter missing person posters. Grocery stores, gas stations, community bulletin boards. The photographs always feel slightly wrong now. Not because the people are missing. Because occasionally, why I know where they'll appear next. Every once in a while, usually during heavy rain, I'll glance at a surveillance monitor in a store or office lobby and catch sight of a familiar forest clearing hidden among ordinary camera feeds. The image never lasts longer than a second. The clearing is always empty, except for someone standing near the trees, watching, waiting, recognizing. And during those moments, I always remember the final sentence hidden inside the oldest archive report recovered from beneath the station. The sentence every previous observer eventually underlined. The sentence was written long before the first camera was ever installed. The forest does not keep the missing. It keeps the people who refuse to stop looking.